record. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a session on an introduction to beekeeping. So this class is going to be going over kind of the big picture, why we might be interested in beekeeping, the methodology of keeping the bees, a lot about how the inner workings of the hive works, and then some kind of brass tacks of how much it's going to cost, how to get started, when to get started, where to put the bees, all that kind of stuff. I have a nice presentation put together for everybody today. I want to reference one more time that we're going to be filtering questions through the chat. I have my lovely co-worker here, Danielle, who is also a beekeeper, and she's going to help facilitate the chat. And she knows a lot of the information as well, so she's going to help answer questions along the way if I'm in the middle of talking about stuff. Danielle, if you could repost the links from before that that are in the chat, so everybody has them for reference. There are some links to for future reading and some videos and stuff, so you guys can look at that stuff later. I'll be referencing them in the presentation a little bit. Let me just give a little bit of background. About my experience, I've been keeping bees since about 2007. I kind of was thrown into it a little bit. We were talking about, there was a lot of interest from the Garden Resource Program members in learning about keeping bees. So we decided to start a beekeeper training program. And at that point, I was working with a local beekeeper who was great. He was still around, Richard Wiesky from Green Toe Gardens. And I started keeping bees that year. I've been doing it ever since. It's a really fascinating pastime, like how the hive functions is really, really so cool, how they work together as a family unit, and how they produce honey over the season, and how they draw a comb and all kinds of stuff. For those who are taking the class or who are of interest and think that they want to go ahead and take the dive and start keeping bees, we also have a beekeeping club that meets monthly. We meet usually the third or fourth Tuesday of the month, but not always the same. But we've been meeting on Zoom during COVID, and it's a support network, and we help out. We also have a honey extractor, and there's just all kinds of resources available as being part of the club. So that's an option once you actually are keeping bees down the road. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can start into the presentation. Before we go, I'll show this really quick. Before I go to that, I'll show this really quick again. So this is this past week, we got we got a couple new packages of bees for the Keep Growing Detroit farm. And this is a video of me installing the bees in high-speed fashion. We'll kind of talk a little bit more about the inner workings of that later, but it just takes a few minutes to install them, just to give you a sense of that. So okay, here we go. An introduction to beekeeping. So why keep bees? Um, there's lots of, reasons listed out here. Pollinators are a huge one. They provide pollination. Bees and other pollinators provide services for our food crops, to pass along pollen from one plant to another. And it's a huge, uh, important step for our food production system. Um, and I just want to note that it's not just honeybees, but other pollinators. There's hundreds of types of bees, solitary bees, um, carpenter bees, and they all have that kind of same similar, important role. Um, uh, Down next one here is a connection to the flows of the season. So when you're a beekeeper, um, and it's similar to being a gardener, it's something that you really need to kind of hone in on what's going on with the weather, because that's going to impact, what you need to do for your bees or what's going on with your bees. So like, you're looking out for the first flowers of the season, because you know that at that point, your bees are good for food. Like, you don't have to provide during the colder, when spring is starting and we have these ebbs and flows of hot and cold weather. When we have flowers out, like early in the spring, dandelion flowers on the maple trees, these are indicators, that, you're safe, that the bees have a lot to forage on. And then as the season kind of winds on, um, there's like times of the year when there's lots of forage available, and that's, another thing that you're paying attention to. And late in the summer, when it's really hot and dry, and we call it the dearth, where the flowers are really dry, and that's another, that's a cause to be okay, to know that's going on for your hive. So this kind of connection to the flow of the season to manage the bees is a fun way to engage with, with nature, and to another way to pay attention, and kind of, think about what is important for the bees and their thriving. We're going to talk a bunch about, these fascinating creatures and the inner workings of the hive, everything from, um, you know, how the queen mates, and what the workers do, and what the drones do, and, um, how the bees make wax, how the bees make honey, how they make propolis, how you can split a hive into two hives, how you can, uh, make your own queens, how you can, or raise your own queens. Um, so it's just a really cool thing to learn about how these bees work and how they function. Next, the obvious one, honey. I think that's probably what brings a lot of people to the table, is the wonderful world of honey, and propolis and pollen. We'll get into these things a little bit more into detail. So let's go ahead and jump in on that. So honeys are very, very much dependent upon the flower source, that, bees are foraging for. So the nectar from these flowers will impact the flavor of and consistency of the honey. So there's, hundreds of, types of honey regionally. I have a small collection of honeys from around the world, and it's really fun to do a taste test and see, like, some of them are more malty, and some of them are really sweet, and some of them you can taste, like if mint flowers are nearby, were foraged, you can kind of taste the mint in there. Or, buckwheat honey tastes like a little bit like molasses. So there's a ton of different honeys and their unique characteristics. Um, there's a black forest honey from Germany, where, the bees harvest nectar from a honeydew, which is essentially, there's a there's another insect that, collects, um, you know nectars from plants, and their excretion is like this honeydew, and it tastes like molasses, and it's really dark and rich. It's good stuff. Um, Honey also has antibacterial properties, so it's considered a health food, and it's anti microbial and antibacterial. So in history, it has been over time, it has been used to dress wounds for that reason. So it's even got a small percentage of hydrogen peroxide in it, so it helps to sterilize a wound. So like, you know, back in the day, they used to dress a wound with a little bit of honey, similar to how we would use like triple antibiotic cream. Um, so honey, good stuff. So now let's take a little trip, and I want to share a video of how honey is made.
One healthy hive will make and consume more than 50 kilograms of honey in a single year, and that takes a lot of work. Honey is made from nectar, but it doesn't come out of flowers as that golden, sticky stuff. But after finding a suitable food source, bees dive in head first, using their long, specially adapted tongues to slurp up tiny sips of nectar into one of two stomachs. A single bee might have to drink from more than 1,000 flowers to fill its honey stomach, which can weigh as much as the bee itself when full of nectar. Now, on the way back to the hive, digestive enzymes are already working to turn that nectar into sweet gold. When she returns to the hive, the forager bee will vomit the nectar into the mouth of another worker, and that bee will vomit it into another bee's mouth, and so on. This game of regurgitation telephone is an important part of the honey making process, since each bee adds more digestive enzymes to turn long chains of complex sugars in the raw nectar into simple monosaccharides like fructose and glucose. Now, at this point, the nectar is still pretty watery, so the bees beat their wings and create an air current inside the hive to evaporate and thicken the nectar, finally capping the cell with beeswax so the enzyme-rich bee barf can complete its transformation into honey. Because of its low water content and acidic pH, honey isn't a very inviting place for bacteria or yeast spoilage. It has an incredibly long shelf life in the hive or in your pantry. Honey has even been found in Egyptian tombs dating back thousands of years, pretty much unspoiled. Although I wouldn't personally eat it, just in case.
So that's honey and how it's made. Now let's move on to propolis. So propolis is basically something that bees collect from nature. They collect saps and resins from different trees, and they bring it back to the hive and use it to seal up cracks and to sterilize the inside of the hive. So it's got a very sticky consistency. The hive, it's a really crucial tool for the bees because they need to, in the hive situation or in nature, they're trying to avoid any kind of real drafts. Like bees can tolerate cold, but intense drafts and moisture can be problematic especially during freezing temperatures, because if the bees get wet and freeze, then that's a real problem. Then they can die. But if they can tolerate freezing temps, but the moisture is a big problem. So propolis plays a role in insulating the hive and keeping the moisture out and keeping the drafty winds out. And it also, for us humans, serves as a function to be a natural source of antiseptic, antimicrobial, and antifungal, antibacterial stuff that we can use in different ways. You may have noticed on your, in some toothpastes, propolis is used. You can harvest the propolis and make a tincture out of it with, in alcohol, and use it for like a throat spray for, for sore throats, or you can also use it as a spray for wounds, to sterilize a wound. So it's it's something that is sticky and kind of hard to manage in the hive, but it plays a very, very important role in the functioning of a working hive. And then next is beeswax. So beeswax is really fascinating stuff. It is, an engineering feat that the bees excrete this wax from their abdomen, and then they draw out this comb that's super light, that can hold like many times its weight in honey. So if you ever lift up a frame with that's got drawn out beeswax comb on it, without any honey in it, still, it's super light. But that one frame can weigh, it's maybe half a pound at most, and one frame of honey weighs about 5 pounds when it's full of honey. So we're going to just take a second, and I want to show a video of the bees excreting wax out of their abdomen. So in this video, these little flakes that are coming out of the behind of this one worker bee here, that is the bee excreting the wax that they will ultimately use to build out comb. And no, come on. And I have one more video of them. So this is what it looks like when they're working together. This is gives you a sense of what it looks like when they're working together to draw out the comb. They lock legs and what's called festoon. So they lock legs, and so and 6 of them will put their behinds together to essentially make that 6-sided cell to build it out. I mean, this isn't a perfect illustration, but it gives you a general sense of it. Oh, and another video is starting. Hold on. Okay. All right, back to the presentation. Okay. So now we have a sense of the reasons why we might want to keep bees. So let's kind of get into in some of the baseline information of like what it takes to get started in terms of resources. So it's, when you're starting out, it's generally recommended that you start with 2 hives. The idea of that being that we want to have, because there are potential issues with hive loss over the winter, having 2 hives provides the opportunity to split a hive if you happen to lose one in the following season. So essentially, it is quite possible that you might lose a hive over the winter. And so the next season, there's this natural, bees will naturally want to split or start a new hive. It's kind of the idea, the kind of function of them as they're functioning as a superorganism. And that's the reproductive cycle, is to split off, start a new, raise a new, them to raise a new queen, and then the old queen takes half of the bees and goes off. That's kind of the called swarming, but you could split the hive to as a artificial swarm, essentially, to start a new hive. So um, all that to say is, like, two hives gives you a little bit of insurance to be able to, you know, continue keeping bees, without, if you only have one hive and you lost it over the winter, then you got to start all the way from the beginning again. Bee packages, like I was showing in the beginning, I was installing a bee package. One 3-pound package is about $130. And there are different types of bees. There are different breeds of bees that you can buy. There are Carnolians, there are Saskatoons, there are Italians, there's Buckfast, there's all kinds of breeds, but they're the general, most of them, they have their attributes. They're, it's I wouldn't necessarily recommend one over the other. They all have, they are all, have good options, and they all generally do really well. And the other type of bee that you could purchase, or way that you could get bees, is in a what's called a nuke, or a nucleus colony. And that is essentially, well, the difference, let's say, is in a package, the bees are basically in a huge bee facility where they have thousands of hives. They are scooping up pounds of bees and putting them into a box, and then taking a raised queen, in a cage, and putting her inside the box. So they are not a cohesive unit yet, and they don't have anything started. There's no foundation, there's no beginning of eggs or any of that stuff. Whereas a nucleus colony is a hive that is being sold as a cohesive unit, where the queen, um, has got a small population that she raised, and it's the beginning. When you get it, she will already be laying eggs and have kind of the baseline of, the beginnings of a hive ready to go. So a package, usually when you're getting equipment and it's brand new equipment, the bees need time to, you know, draw out the comb to be able for the queen to lay eggs, to increase the population and all of that kind of stuff. And in the situation where, that just takes a little bit of time for them to get off the ground, packages are cheaper. It's usually the way I go. But nukes are a really, really good option. They just tend to cost more, usually around $200. The next thing would be hive equipment. So hive equipment is going to cost between $150 to $200. That would be, and we'll show some pictures of that a little bit later in the presentation. But it's essentially four to five boxes that you would get. They come unassembled. You can get them a little bit cheaper, or assembled. You're going to pay for, them to be assembled. So it's basically, the supers are the boxes. So, a super looks similar to this. And then the frames are the individual. This is, these have pictures in them, but to give you the sense of things, this is an example of a frame. And then there's what's called a bottom board, which is the boxes sit on top of, and then there's an inside cover and an outside cover, or an inner cover, and a telescoping cover. Those are pretty standard. If you're looking for, just to get a sense of equipment, and you want to check out some catalogs, you can look, Danielle, if you could, I'm going to say a few brands, if you could add them to the chat. So there's Dadant, Dadant. There's Man Lake, MANN. And locally, there's Cutlers. and there's a Turtle Tree. There are a few local places that sell stuff. So like, I mean, local meaning like an hour drive. There's a Dadot in Albion. There's Cutler's, I think, is in up near the Thumb. So so hive equipment, you're gonna paying around, again, $150 to $200. And then next would be protective gear. You can get there's lots of different options of veils and jacket, but you want to have at the very least some kind of veil, something to cover your head. You can usually wear most any covering in terms of a jacket. It could be like an old shirt or something, but there are specific ones. They're usually white. Whatever it is, I would just recommend that you don't mind it getting dirty, because it's pretty common to get propolis and honey and bee poop and all kinds of stuff on them. And then there's some special gloves with long gauntlets, and we'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. Finally is tools. There's a hive tool. We'll give some examples of those later, and a smoker. So baseline, you're looking at, in terms of investment, you're looking at least $400. And then probably if you're doing 2 hives, almost twice that, probably close to $600 or $700 at least, just to get started. So that gives a sense of the investment that you might be thinking about before starting a hive. And I just want to take a second to say, beekeeping is not easy. Hive loss over the winter, national rates are 50% loss annually. So it's, and that's predominantly related to this one pest, the varroa mite. And with the people in the class, we'll get into this a lot more in detail as the class goes on. I don't want this to discourage you necessarily from keeping bees, but just to take it, to take that into consideration, that like there are some challenges, and dealing with this one pest in particular is kind of a bear. And then I want to take a second just to put out there that there are other ways to support pollinators aside from keeping honeybees. There are a few references here, and Danielle's, they put them in the chat earlier. Maybe if you could put that list of links in the chat one more time. There are a few resources that are really great. In particular, this is attracting beneficial insects with native flowering plants. So this is like, if you're looking to set up a pollinator garden, this is a really great list here. You can't, it's sideways, but you can see there's a bunch of varieties of plants, and they tell you their bloom times, so you can set it up, do a mixed planting to have things blooming at all times of the season to attract pollinators. So this is good for honeybees and all kinds of other pollinators. It's really great to have for your garden. And then I also wanted to share this, there's, for those native bees I was referring to, there are ways to set up little houses for them. And here's a good resource for that as well. Okay, we'll take a second. How are we doing with the chat, Danielle?
All right, so we're doing pretty good. We're doing all right. Did have a question about the Sweet on Detroit beekeeping class. Can people still join that class, Keto? That course?
No, unfortunately not. We only have a limited amount of space available in the class, and we are more than full.
All right, thanks. Yeah, other than that, we're looking good.
Okay. Just to address that a little more, there are some other organizations that do beginning beekeeping classes, but usually that's something that usually starts in the beginning of the year. So look out for the Michigan Beekeepers Association, SEMBA, Southeast Michigan Beekeepers Association, and then Keep Growing Detroit's Sweet on Detroit program. Our applications usually go out in March, and the class starts, this is the first class in the series. So if you're interested, drop me an email. My email will be in the chat, or put your name in the chat, and Daniel will make a note and I can make sure that you have the information for next year's class. So how does a honeybee hive work? What's the kind of what is going on in the hive? What is the function of the hive? So a new hive, like a package like we just installed this week, is usually about 10,000 bees and a queen. And then at the height of at the height of the season, the population will grow to 60,000 bees or more. And the hive works together as a superorganism, which I kind of talked about a little bit earlier. And what I mean by that is the bees, there's 60,000 bees. There's the female workers, there's the male drones and the queen, and they're all working together to provide, to function as one entity that, so they work together to increase the population, to go out to forage for food, for survival, and then, then they have a reproductive cycle where the hive will swarm to start a new hive to proliferate the genetics and in the line of the bees, the family, continue the family on, essentially. So their role is to, going down the list here, collect food, go out and collect nectar, and make it into that food source that can be stored in the comb for winter rations. And I didn't even talk about pollen earlier, but pollen is another thing that I should have highlighted at the beginning. Pollen is another source of something that humans are interested in on some level. Pollen is the protein source for young bees. So the bees will collect that on the backs of their legs. And there are ways to harvest that from the bees to use as a nutritional supplement. Some people use it to address, allergy issues, because it can be kind of a way to, take in that pollen to kind of adjust your system to get used to it. Moving on, the bees are build out their hive, their home. They build out the wax comb to store the honey and to raise the young. And then they make the propolis to paint, essentially, and sterilize the inside of the hive. And then the queen is raising new bees. The queen's laying 1,200 plus eggs a day. And then the workers are raising the young. And then finally they're protecting the hive. They have guard bees on the outside, if and give a sense of when the bees are protected and when they're not. If they're in a situation, and they're new and working a hive, generally bees are not too annoyed with us humans going in and taking a look and inspecting and so forth. But there are times of the season, like when their nectar forage is low, the dearth season late in the summer when it's hot and dry. That's often a time when bees are a little bit more protective, and may show you signs that, okay, they may be pinging your veil, or the volume of the hive gets louder. You get a sense that it's probably a good idea to just go in there, do your work, and get out of there, to make sure everything's okay. This is another video that I highly, highly recommend that everybody watch. It really gives, I'm not going to watch it now because it's about an hour long, but the link to it is in the chat. And if you're in the class, you should have gotten an email with the link earlier in the week. But essentially this video is called Tales from the Hive. And it's David Attenborough narrating kind of the inner workings of a hive, and they get these amazing video shots of the hive on the inside and them drawing out comb and the queen getting mated. Like, it's bonkers. So really cool video, highly recommend. And it really gives a sense of like some, a visual and a story about a lot of what's happening inside the hive as the bees are going through the season. Okay. So who lives in the honeybee hive? Who are these characters that, that consist of the main course of the bees and the hive? So question, who's the imitator here? I'm going to throw it up in the chat. Danielle, you want to report out? I can't watch the chat right now.
Okay, so folks are saying the one on the left, he's a wasp, the one on the left, same guy on the left, and the wasp. Lefty is the yellow jacket, someone says.
Correct.
Too.
Yes. Left is a yellow jacket. Right is a hoverfly. And in the middle is our worker bee, honeybee. And just a note about yellow jackets is that people are always, especially late in the summer when yellow jackets are being super annoying, people always call them bees. Yellowback jackets are wasps. So I don't know if you're feeling, like you want to educate somebody or share information. Like, honeybees would never come to, munch on your hot dog when you're at a picnic at the park. Yellow jackets are omnivores, and they're in scavengers, and they're looking for protein. And towards the end of the season, their food, they're super, they're crazy. They're trying to get a lot of food before they figure out a way to, to winter themselves. So it's a common misconception that yellow jackets are bees. Honeybees, for the most part, keep to themselves unless they're protecting their hive. And so they're not really going to ever come after you or be annoying. Okay. A little bit of history about honeybees. So honeybees are not native to North America. They were imported early in settlement of the U.S. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but here's a little bit of notes of, as early as 1622, bees were brought to Virginia, and then, they kind of migrated across the country as time went on. Looks like they landed in Michigan in the late 1700s. So they've been, they've definitely been in North America for hundreds of years, but not thousands or millions like in other, other situations. Like a lot of the native bees here, like sweat bees and carpenter bees and all of those have been here all along. And so they're much more well adapted to our climate. Though these bees did come from Europe, which has, a similar climate to North America, and, and clearly people have been keeping honeybees here for a very long time. But I think it's a really interesting information to know that the function, that the history of them here in the United States. So these are the three main characters who live inside the hive. The queen on the right, you'll notice that she has a long abdomen, or she's got a big booty, and she's got a mark on her back. Looks like like a sloppily painted mark, but that is used to indicate, to help identify how old the queen is if you get a marked queen. So there's like an international system of colors relating to years. So, white is 2018. I don't remember the color year exactly, but just to give a sense, like white is 2018, yellow is 2019, so on and so forth. Drones are in the middle. They're the second largest bee. Those are the males. They have very large eyes, and that function is something that has partially to do with their role in mating with queens. And then to the left is the worker bees, though they make up the majority of the population of the hive. Oh. Oh. Okay, we'll start with the queen. A hive typically only has one queen. So the queen, her main function is to lay eggs. So she will lay up to 12 to 1,500 eggs a day. And she doesn't even feed herself. She has attendants that feed her. So she's just going around, sticking her behind in the cells and laying eggs. Um, uh, the difference between the queen and the worker in terms of their development is that the queen was fed a primary diet of royal jelly early on in her development, which caused the development of her abilities to lay other workers and drones. She lives the longest out of all of the bees. So she can live 3 to 5 years. She's essentially the heart and soul of the hive, but she is not necessarily always the leader, as you would think the title queen would indicate. So she's more of she is the mother, but the workers, they kind of the choices that they make are partially based on what the workers deem important, which I'll get into a little bit more later. So if a hive goes queenless, if you accidentally squish a queen, or she's getting old, or she dies for any number of reasons, the hive is very much functions on her scent, her pheromone. So a big communication tool in the hive is the pheromone, the smells that the bees give off and the queen gives off. So her scent in the hive helps the bees know that things are copacetic, and they know that there are more workers being laid, and everything is as it should be. With the lack of her pheromone, for an extended period of time, the workers will do a couple of things. Hopefully there's still a few day old eggs, and in that case then the workers will take a few day old egg and start to raise out a new queen. But in some circumstances that's not an option, and then the workers will become a few of them or more will become laying workers, which is a problem. Essentially they will start to lay eggs, multiples of them, and the only babies that come out of those eggs are drones. A laying worker doesn't have the ability to lay other workers. So that is, it's a big problem to resolve if you have a laying worker. So if you ever, one of the main things that we're trying to do when we do in hive inspections is make sure that we see evidence that the queen is laying. We don't always have to see the queen because sometimes she's elusive, but we want to see that evidence that she's laying eggs, and making sure that that isn't a problem, that we have a laying worker. Queens will spend the majority of their life they spend the majority of their life in the inside of the hive. They tend to always go towards the darkness. If you think about it, the inside of the hive, or in the natural setting, a tree trunk or something like that, is always dark. And so she's always moving away from the light, because she's, going to be laying eggs. And and she always is, so if you're holding up a frame and she happens to be on there, she'll always, move away from whatever light source there is. Um, Essentially, once she's born, she goes out. Once she, and she begins to fly, have the ability to fly after she's born, she goes out on one to half dozen mating flights, and she'll go out and to what's called a drone congregation area. So we haven't talked about the drones yet, but the drones are the males, again, to refresh. So the drones congregate in somewhere off outside of the hive, usually sometimes up in the trees, but there's a population of drones that get together, kind of like they're meeting at the bar or something. Um, and their main function is to mate queens. And you don't want to mate, and the queen, by instinct isn't gonna, and the drones by instinct aren't gonna mate with a queen from their own hive. So drones from the region, from your hive, from my hive, from other beekeepers' hives around, will gather together, and queens will come along, and the drone will mate with the queen. Multiple drones will mate with the queen. And there's a really amazing video of this in that Tales of the Hive video I mentioned earlier. And when they mate with her, after they're done, their insides will come out and the drone will die. So it's kind of a pretty dramatic. So essentially, the queen will go out. She'll do a mating flight. She'll mate with, half dozen or more drones, and then come back to the hive. And then she has a sac inside of her called the spermatheca, which holds that sperm. So she has essentially enough sperm inside of her to lay eggs for the remainder of her life. She doesn't go out and mate again. So if you think about it, that's millions. I never even thought about the math, but if she's laying upwards of 1,200 eggs a day, and she lives 3 to 5 years, I mean, that's lots and lots of eggs or sperm that she has just in her, that she's just from a few mating flights. Kind of amazing. There is a way to identify, we'll talk about, let's see if I wanted to show a picture of a queen cell. So there are different Daniel, can you see me all right? Okay. Well, in any case.
If you put that, are you holding up a frame, Keto?
Yeah.
Can you just hold it up against your shirt, because it's getting lost in your background?
Oh, my background's still on. How's that?
Yeah, a little bit better. Yeah.
Does that work? Or should I take the background off?
Take your background off, probably.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay. So when you are looking at the inside of a hive, just to give you some a little bit of identifiers of what you're looking at, this is a picture of a queen cup. So usually in the hive, there is towards the bottom of the hive is there are a bunch of frames. So how the hive is set up is this system of hives is there's a bunch of frames that imitate the natural function of the hive to have comb with bee space between them. And these are removable frames so you can look at the individual comb. So in a natural setting, bees always have these kind of layers of vertical comb and space between them for them to do their work on either side of that comb, you know. And usually towards the bottom of the hive is where what's called the brood nest is. So the brood nest is where the babies are being raised. So there's this on the in the lower boxes or towards the bottom where the hive is, there's an area in the center of those slats of comb that where all the babies are being raised. So there's the and that's, you know, where the queen is doing her work. And on the outside, so like you know, for if you think of like this, if you took a basketball and you sliced it, there would be like smaller sections and larger and smaller and smaller. That's kind of how the brood nest is inside of that area. So in this case, this is a brood. This is what where all these things in the center is the capped brood or capped babies that are in the middle of development. And then,
You know, I have some comb to show.
great.
So here's some.
Right.
So yeah, here's just like some comb that I had. Here's like capped. This is like an old frame because you could see it's like really dark and black. So like this was capped and there was like some honey and stuff in there, and then this is all uncapped.
Great. Right. And so we over time we'll learn the difference between capped brood and capped honey and capped workers and capped capped drones. And getting back to my whole point of where I was going with this from the beginning is what a queen cell looks like. So there are, you know, different the different characters, the queens, the workers, and the drones, all three of them, when they're in development, when they're in their cells before, when their baby's developing, they all look very different. So the queen's cell, if I can find it again, where was it? The queen's cell is, this is one example. Usually it's a cell that's vertical up and down as opposed to horizontal, you know, side to side. And this is kind of a short and stout one. Usually it looks kind of like a peanut, you know, it's long. And there's oftentimes they will have uncapped, the workers will set up some uncapped, like in this case, queen cups that, you know, in case they, as a preparation measure, in case they need to replace the queen at some point. Okay, so back to the slides. How are we doing on questions?
I have a queen question. Does each queen bee have a unique pheromone, or do they all smell the same?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. I think, you know, like no human is exactly alike. I think similarly, no queen is exactly alike, but I mean, I think the pheromone is probably similar, or like one example of why that might be pretty similar is that bees, you know, bees and queens can be interchangeable within hives. You can take, you know, you can take workers if you're doing things with your different, you know, you have 4 or 5 hives, say, and you want to interchange, you know, this hive is kind of weak and it needs more population, so you take some of those, some of those bees and inner workings of the hive, and you can transpose it over to the other hive. So that's functionally, that works. So the pheromone is, I think, pretty similar. Any other questions?
Also, if you're part of the Sweet on Detroit class, will those classes be recorded as well?
If you're in the class, yes. Well, this class will be available on our YouTube channel, but all the remaining classes will be available by video. Yes.
That's it so far. Thanks,
Okay,
Kido.
great. Okay. So we're going to keep going. The queen does have a stinger, but she only uses it in the situation where she is battling another queen. This is kind of a rare occurrence, but there are situations where you are either between, you're manipulating the hive and you're uniting two hives. If those two queens interact, they will attempt to kill each other, and whoever dominates and wins will will take over the entire hive. And then another example is if they're if you're raising queens, there's a way to specifically take eggs and encourage the bees to raise them out into queens. And if one of those queens happens to hatch out before the other ones, she'll go through and kill the rest of the bees. Or if they hatch out at the same time, they'll have this battle to the end. Okay, moving on to drones. So drones are, again, the male bees, and we talked a little bit about the drone congregation areas. So their main function is to mate with other queens, to provide genetic material for the queen to be able to lay eggs, to lay workers. Because of their large body size, they also help maintain the internal temperature of the hive. They don't have stingers. So, a good way when you're practicing, there is, cause to want to pick up a bee. Like if you're trying to mark a queen or you're doing something to work with the queen, a good way to practice is to practice on drones because they don't have stingers and they're, relatively easy to pick up. And workers don't even feed themselves. They are essentially, the workers, the female bees feed the queen, they feed the drones. The drones are, essentially, it doesn't necessarily make sense to me that they would not serve more function, but that's just kind of the way Mother Nature decided it would be, I guess. But they are, they're going out to the drone congregation area and they're hanging out in the hive and not doing much else. But downside for them is towards the end of the season, all of the drones will get kicked out of the hive. So into the winter, the only bees that remain are the late developed workers that were raised right at the end of the season. So the queen will raise a last set of workers before the winter weather really sets in. So they will live a long time through the winter. So because she's not raising bees through the winter months. And the queen. So the workers and the queens go through the winter. The drones do not go through the winter. Drones live about 90 days. We talked about them dying. And on to the stars of the hive. I would say even more than the queen. The workers do it all. Yes, the queen, she's got her pheromone that she communicates and makes sure that the bees feel like everything's good. And yes, she does lay lay all the babies. And she lays both, just to be clear, she lays workers and she lays drones. And she, that's partially based on the communications that she's having with workers on how much to do of either. But the workers, they are raising the young. They are feeding the queen. They are feeding the drones. They are uh, managing the honey. So they're either foraging the honey or they're in the hive and putting the honey in the cells and capping it. They are grooming each other and grooming the queen. They are uh, um, they're doing it all. They're protecting the hive. And I talked a little bit about laying workers, but just to reiterate, so if a hive happens to go queenless, then the pheromone changes, and that the workers decide, well, we need to keep, we need to lay more babies. Like that's just their impulse, and so they will start laying, but they're only going to be laying drones in that situation, which is problematic. So they live. So this is a good rundown of the worker bee and their job. So when they're 1 to 2 days old, their main job is cleaning the cells, and they keep the brood warm. As they get a little bit older, their job is to feed the older larvae before it's capped. 6 to 11 days, they're feeding the youngest larvae. 12 to 17 days, they're starting to help with drawing out comb and carrying food and starting the construction duties, so to speak, in the hive. And then and they get a little bit older, they're moved on to being the guard duty. And then from 22 days till they die, they usually live to about 45 days. They're going out to forage for nectar and pollen and water, and etc. Worker bees in their lifetime are usually, they're working 24/7. They are always active. And so they almost quite literally work themselves to death. So they got a lot going on. Here's a good illustration of the honeybee life cycle. So the queen will lay an egg, and the egg looks like a tiny grain of rice. It's probably, at most or approximately a 1/4 inch in length. You can see in the bottom of the cells. You got to have good eyes to be able to see them. Not everybody can. But it's a really good thing to learn or to get a sense of, like how to identify that there are eggs present, because that's a really important thing to know to make sure that everything is good with the queen. So after the queen lays the eggs, then the worker bees come through and keep feeding that hatched larvae, and it slowly gets larger and larger until it gets to its full growth. And then the worker seals the cell with wax, and then the larvae itself spins a cocoon and changes into a pupa, and then the adult bee emerges. And here is here's like a visual of a lot of the different stages. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. So egg, larvae in development, and then this is before pupation, and then this is, before they're probably spinning their cocoon about this time, and then afterward they'll emerge. Looking, like these. This is a good example of a queen. Let's see if there's anything else I can share with these images. Okay. How are we doing on questions?
Okay, we got a ton of questions.
Okay.
I tried to do my best to answer them.
Okay.
Um, so first, came from Byron. Is there a king bee? Is there a dominant male bee, or does the queen mate with anybody?
There is no king bee. There is no. They mate with any drone.
Okay.
I think they're drawn to drones that are not of their lineage.
Oh, where does the royal jelly come in, and when is it made?
Oh man, stumper. Um, well, I can't remember how
Yeah.
they make the royal jelly. I can't remember how they make the royal jelly. Um, but they make it. Um, and
How is it different than the normal stuff that they're feeding the queen?
well, that is the primary thing that they're feeding the queen. So there's, I mean, what the bees, in general are honey for carbohydrates, pollen for protein, and then for the special development of the queen, the royal jelly comes into play. Man, I'm sorry. I'm gonna come back for those in the class. I'm gonna have the backstory on royal jelly at the next class. I just haven't thought about that in a while.
Yeah, I remember you talking about it in the class, but I just know it's got special stuff and it's given to the queen in the beginning,
Yeah,
like when they're in the development of the queen.
right,
Okay.
right.
Um, if the hive fails due to the varroa mite or some other purpose, how do you prepare your equipment for a new set of bees? Is scent management a part of the preparations? Can
No.
a queen smell the presence of a prior queen?
If you lose the hive for whatever reason, as long as it's not disease related, then you can more or less just reuse the equipment. And the scent, the scent is only a factor when with the bees, the live bees in situ in the situation. So, uh, um, so if you lost the bees to varroa in particular, then you can reuse that equipment, and that's not a problem.
Okay. Can you like mix different types of bees together, and mix them from other hives?
Yes. Well, different types of bees, different types of, in terms of different breeds of bees. Yes, like you can mix Carnolians and Italians, but you can't mix honeybees with carpenter bees, for instance, or something like.
Mm, okay. What do they do in the winter?
Great question. So, as the we're going to get into kind of the seasonal flow, but we can talk about it. As the season comes to an end, they kick out the drones, and then um, they are, the winter bees have been raised, and so they're kind of fresh and ready to go, to take the hive through the winter. And essentially, they huddle in a cluster in the center of the hive around the queen. And periodically, the ones in the center of the cluster will work their way to the outside. So they'll kind of trade off spaces um, for keeping keeping the queen warm. And they vibrate their bodies, their thorax, to generate heat. Um, so, like I said, mentioned earlier, like the bees will, they can tolerate freezing temperatures, but if there's a lot of draft, constantly pulling that heat off of them, and or is if there's any risk of moisture being a problem, then that could cause the bees to get frozen and and have issues with die off. Um, but yeah, essentially they're huddling in a cluster when they have this really amazing ability to concentrate their excrement, their like their doo doo. They have a special ability during the winter months to like not have to, because they usually they will never poop or pee inside of the hive, or it's kind of the same thing at once. They will never do that inside of the hive, like uh, by their nature. So they have the ability when it's so cold that in the cluster to hold it inside and to extract the water from it to concentrate it inside of them. And then when there are warmer days above 45, 50 degrees, they'll go out on cleansing flights, essentially go out to use the bathroom and come back. And you may see, yellow markings just outside of the hive or in the snow, trailed off in front of the hive we get those chance warm days because the bees are holding it so bad. They gotta get out and you know, let it out. Um, and they slowly work through their food rations over the winter. So as a cluster, you know, typically they start at the bottom of the hive and they work themselves slowly up through, through their food stores towards the top. So an indicator that they might be running low on food stores is when you see the cluster towards the top of the hive. Um, the honey that's present in the hive also serves as an insulation value for them during the winter months.
Okay. Are worker egg, so worker eggs are drones?
No.
Okay.
Oh, worker eggs are drones. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, the babies that workers lay are drones only. They don't have the ability
Okay.
to lay other workers.
Okay. Uh, Going back to the varroa mite, how can you tell if the hive is infected with this particular problem and what do you do about it?
Yeah, so varroa mites, there's a way to do a mite population tests. In essentially, you take out some of the bees, which you can approximate to be about 300 bees. Is like almost a half a cup is about 300 bees. You put them into a jar with powdered, and then that has a screened lid on it, and you put powdered sugar in there, and basically you and you agitate. This sounds like torture, I know, but it's for a good cause. So you do that to agitate the bees, and if they have any mites present on their bodies, then the powdered sugar and them being agitated will cause the mites to fall off. And then you can do a mite count, per 100 bees, like kind of get to per 100 bees, and that'll kind of give you a sense of how bad the mite population is. And then there are a handful of treatments available. Um, and most of them are some concentration of a naturally occurring thing like oxalic acid, or formic acid, are like kind of, they're present in nature, but they're concentrated into a chemical, unfortunately, um, that we would use to treat the bees at least 2 times a season. Um, and it's basically putting this treatment on there, and the fumes from it are detrimental to the mites and knock back the population. We're going to go through this in depth with the class, because it's so important. But there's some really good resources out there I can share too. It's if you aren't in the class, you can reach out to me and I'll share those at another time.
Okay, Alexis is asking about the slide about the life cycle. I think this has been up, but then if you could just go back to, I think maybe, or the one where it said the number of days, if that was helpful. Okay, cool. There we go, Alexis. And then while that's up, can you comment on carpenter bees?
They're cute. uh they look kind of like bumblebees. um they are a solitary bee that, I have them in my yard. They will drill a perfectly round hole into, oftentimes, like the eaves, like they are in the eaves of my garage. um and then they will raise a small brood of young from that, in that cell. They cause a little damage, they like, I'm slowly getting more holes in my garage, but um, they serve a pollinator function, and they're fun to see around. They're like slightly bigger than a bumblebee. They aren't aggressive. They're so you know I decided to let them go at my yard, but like if the population got big enough, I would like maybe be like, well, I don't want you to ruin my garage anymore. But generally speaking, it's relatively, it's not like an infestation like carpenter ants, for instance. Um, so I think they're cool. Any other questions on that?
No, that's the last question so far. Thanks,
Okay.
Keto.
Okay. Okay. Just to get into some of the kind of talk a little bit more, some of the tools that you would need. Um, you're going to want some kind of hat or veil. This is an example of what we call a folding veil with a hat that comes with it. You can use this same veil with a baseball cap. It's nice. It's convenient because it folds up and you can throw it in a bag or something. Um, uh, and or you can have like full bee suits, similar to this, or jackets, or some kind of combination. At the baseline, you always want to have at least a veil and some gloves. You may go on YouTube or see other resources where people talk about keeping bees without using protective gear. And yes, is it possible? And, do people do it? Yes. But for new beekeepers, I just think it's, there's so much to think about. And when you're working in the hive, and managing if you're going to get stung in the face is not, having to think about that is just something to avoid. Like a lot of the there's a lot to be said for confidence when you're actually working the hive. Like if you are nervous, you know the bees can tell, they can smell that. And you'll get a different reaction than somebody who is totally at ease because they feel confident in what they're doing. So wearing the protective gear, um, helps just have confidence when you're going in there to do a specific task. So for that reason, protective gear is super important in my mind. Gloves are generally, could be anything from, simple latex gloves to, the ones that you get from the beekeeper supply stores. Has a longer kind of gauntlet arm that covers up to your elbows so they can't get inside. Generally when we're putting on protective gear, we're just trying to sew up any holes that the bees could get into for, to potentially sting you. Um, and generally speaking, um, I'm a fan of there's like a combination veil jacket combo that you can either zip up or pull over, like I was wearing in that video in the beginning. It's just simple and easy, and it's just one piece, which is nice. It does have like the wire rim, so it doesn't fold up so as easily, but still it's nice. The wire rim is nice because it helps shade your face. Let's see. Um, so this is just to give a little bit more information about beekeeping equipment. Um, so um, this is kind of gives you a concept of what a typical hive would look like. So these corners of these hives are cut away just so you can see the inside. But essentially, we have um, at the bottom are two what are called deeps, and then above that is what's called a queen excluder, and then above that are mediums, and then the inner cover and the telescoping cover. So um, you can get equipment that's either all mediums or similar to this, which is two deeps and two mediums. Um, Deeps are um, are really nice because they are a great, ideal for the brood nest because they're deeper and they kind of fit the kind of typical size of where the brood nest would be. Whereas mediums are gonna like kind of span two, or the brood nest is gonna span two of those boxes. Um, so some people will opt to, I usually opt to just do mediums just because um, the interchangeability of having the same equipment all top to bottom, um, I feel is more convenient and easy to work with. Whereas like if you have deeps and, when you're manipulating hives, if you like say you wanted to move frames to this or this area, you can't interchange the deep stuff with the medium stuff. Um, let's see what else. So there are different sizes you can get, like in terms of the width and the amount of frames that you would get in these boxes. So this is 10 frame equipment. So each of these boxes will hold 10 frames. Inside of each of those frames is the what you put in before for the bees to draw comb on is called foundation. So you have a frame with foundation in it, and they draw out the comb to raise the brood or raise the babies in, and to draw out the comb to put the honey in and cap it for storage for winter use. Um, so, essentially, when we're starting out a hive from the beginning, we're either starting out with one deep on the bottom, and we're installing the bees in that, or two mediums, installing the bees in that. So we don't put all of our equipment out there all at once. We more want to set up the hive for them to be able to, they bees don't like open space. They want to fill out, they fill it out incrementally based on their population. So from the beginning, you want to start out with a manageable space for them to draw out the comb and get situated, and the queen to be laying, and they'll slowly fill out the outer edges with outer edges of the brood nest with honey and pollen, and then above that, after that, it'll be supers of just honey, uh, uh, and so on and so forth. And this screened piece in the middle here is called a queen excluder. And that's designed to prevent the queen from laying eggs above, what we want to keep her down below to be just laying eggs below. She sometimes will, based on her temperament or whatever, she will move freely through the hive and, raise the brood nest will kind of migrate. But some beekeepers try and keep it kind of clean by putting that queen excluder in. I typically don't use them because the bees, for the most part, it's not an issue. But if you have lots of hives, it's a helpful tool. Just as it's a management strategy. So that's a kind of overview of Langstroth hive equipment. This is by far not the only beekeeping equipment that people use to raise bees in. There are top bar hives, there's ware hives, there's Apame is kind of a newer design one. There's the flow hive. There, a lot of things have been tried out over the years. And I think my personal opinion is that the Langstroth hive has kind of endured as a simple system to work with that that is relatively inexpensive and provides what the bees need and allows for allows for inspection relatively easily, and it works well for helping the bees have what they need to go through the winter. um, you know I've experimented some with top bar hives, and I think they were developed originally for use in warmer climates. I think in Africa. I'm not exactly sure what the total story is, but they, in my mind, function much better in warmer climates, and I've had challenges. Of the beekeepers, a handful of bee club members over the years have tried them too, and it just um, they don't seem to do as well. There are some beekeepers in Michigan that swear by them, but it's all an opinion thing. I guess I'll take 1 minute here to just talk about. There's a beekeeper adage, and I'll say this a few times throughout the class. Um, there's lots of different options about how to keep bees, what to do in any one situation, and there's an old adage that is, you talk to 10 beekeepers and you're going to get 10 different opinions about how to do anything. Um, my intention with this class and with the beekeeping series is to give you um, the range of options and give you some ideas, and and how the bees function, and all the kind of information to make informed guesses or informed decisions to do your own, to um, decide how you want to do things. Okay, so moving on to some some tool options. So this is a really crucial tool to always have when you're going to inspect hives. And it's essentially a type of pry bar, to be able, because um, when you are moving the supers or moving frames, all of that stuff is propolized together, so it's kind of stuck together. Um, and you need a tool to pry it up or to crack it apart, and that's where the hive tool comes in. The third one from the left is the one I prefer because it's got that little hook on it. And it really helps. Functionally, it really helps for prying up the frames when you're taking them out. But some form of hive tool is very important. And the other, main tool is the smoker. The smoker is used so basically what you're doing is you are starting a small fire inside of there and extinguishing it. And so that you can use those bellows to puff smoke out. Um, and the idea here is that the smoke causes a few things. It causes the bees to ingest some honey, because it's a instinct for them, in the presence of smoke, to ingest honey in case they need to leave the hive, like if there was a fire and they need to swarm because of the fire. And if they have honey in their stomach, then they can't bend themselves in half, to in the attack position to sting. Not that that always would be the case, but that it makes them, essentially, because they have more honey in their stomach, they will. That's one of the reasons they will be less aggressive. The smoke also masks the pheromone of their communication. So if there is kind of any kind of communication, like, we don't want these people inside of the hive, it just kind of blocks communication, so you can get in there and do what you're doing, to make sure that everything is copacetic. Um, there are many ways of starting a smoker and different types of fuel to use. But usually you want something that's somewhat resinous, like uh, um, cedar. Like a really easy one that you can just purchase would be cedar chips, like you would get for a hamster cage. And those, because they have the oils in them, provide a nice smoke. You can use sumac berries, because and those work well. You can do sage, or there are a whole number of things, but the intention there is that it's got the ability to light up a little bit, and once it's extinguished, it gives off a nice smoke. And it's definitely something that there's a learning curve on getting a smoker lit to provide the function. But and when you're using a smoker, you're not trying to totally bomb them. You're not, of course, the intention is not to kill the bees at all. You're really just trying to pacify them. So it's just a few puffs in the entrance, a few puffs on the bees, and that's mostly it. And unless, it feels like there are a few there are things that sounds or smells that would be indicators that the bees are unhappy and maybe it's time to close up the hive. So you maybe would smoke a little bit more in that situation to pacify them until you are able to close the hive up. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, a little bit of a review of seasonal tasks. So to kind of give a general sense of the flow of like from beginning to end, right when you're getting started, usually you order bees from December to March, and with the expectation that they're going to arrive in Michigan in April or May. If you wait, you will get a late start. And then you're also, this is the time to get the equipment already. Generally speaking, most packages of bees, like the upper right-hand corner, those 3-pound packages we were talking about in the beginning, most packages are coming either from Georgia. There's a few big suppliers in Georgia or California. And those two regions supply the bees for most of the continental United States. In the case of the nukes, which is a really good option, and part of that is with the option with nukes is the ability to get a locally produced nuke. And the idea behind that is a locally produced nuke would be something where the people who are raising those nukes are really focused on genetics and trying to keep a line of bees that have been successful in overwintering well and seem to be, other characteristics are like they seem to manage mites well or things like that. And so in that case, those are, could be coming from, somewhere in our local Michigan region. So you order your bees in December and they arrive in May and you have your equipment ready to go. And then before the bees arrive, you're setting up where the bees are going to go. You want them to be in full sun, away from like traffic or like pedestrian traffic. Kind of an out of the way place is ideal. In particular, the bees will come and go from the bottom entrance. You can see that dark line with the bees around it on the picture here. That's the main entrance. And so you want that to be pointed away from, common thoroughfares. And also probably a good idea is to set yourself up to not have, to put mulch in front of the hive or or some kind of burlap or something, so you don't have to mow the lawn in front of the hive, because that's a potential problem with, with getting stung while you're trying to mow the lawn. If you can, having some kind of windbreak is helpful. That could be a fence or some shrubs or something, but from predominant winds, that's more important during the winter months. But like if you're thinking about where the hive is going to go, it's a good consideration, because trying to break that those predominant winds during the winter months is going to be a really important thing to consider for their survival. When they arrive, we're going to install them into just the bottom. In this case, it would have just been this one deep or two mediums, as I had mentioned earlier. And then when we have brand new equipment, we're really trying to encourage them to be able to build up and draw out comb as soon as possible. So we're going to be going to feed them sugar syrup just to provide another food source, so they can just focus as much as possible on drawing out the comb. So once the comb is done, then the queen can start laying, and then to increase the population, and then the hive starts to really go and do what it needs to do. And then after they're, we've set them up, then we're doing an inspection every 2 weeks or so to check, does it look like their queen right? Does it look like, do you see evidence that of new eggs that the queen is laying, and capped worker brood? Do you see a good brood pattern? And that's something we'll kind of talk about over time, but we're looking that everything that the queen isn't laying eggs really sporadic, or she's doing things in somewhat of a uniform fashion. Um, and then because we're just starting out with 1 or 2 boxes, we want to have them fill out those boxes, the majority of them, 80%, before we add another box. How are we doing on questions?
I have a couple.
Okay.
Is it worth it? Is used hive equipment worthwhile?
Yeah. It would be good to inspect it before you actually, you seal the deal. If it just looks really dirty, or there's one disease that's called nosema, which is basically a form of dysentery, which causes the bees to not be able to hold their poop in, and they end up pooping inside of the hive. Um, and so you'll see like little black flecks all over the comb, or like little drippy brown, dried drips on the equipment in that case. Um, you can clean that kind of equipment up, but it's work and maybe not worth the effort. You can always reuse the supers. Supers are probably, the boxes themselves are probably the safest thing to reuse, and you can sterilize the inside of them by relatively easily by using a torch, um, like a plumber's torch, to torch, kind of sear the inside of them. Or you can also put the equipment out when on sunny days. You can use the natural, um, sanitizing abilities of the sun to clean, to sterilize equipment to some degree. But yeah.
Okay. Hmm, can the hive get too hot for the bees in the summer?
Um, oh, another great question. So yes and no. I mean, basically they have the ability to manage that. But it's a really good thing to know, is like when in the real heat of the summer, sometimes the bees will, the majority of them, they're always managing the eggs, what's going on with the eggs and what's going on with the queen, and working around that. So if it's really hot, a lot of the population may move to the outside front of the hive and just be on a cluster on the front, which is called bearding, which is a little bit alarming. You're like, oh no, what's going on? Are they about to swarm? But it could be just them bearding to cool the hive, because it's really warm out. In that case, you'd probably see a lot of them fanning, like sticking their butts in the air and flapping their wings to provide some air conditioning, and they can manage that to some degree in the inside of the hive as well. But it's also a good reason to set up good ventilation, to have the entrance completely open. And there are some things that you can do to set up your inner and outer cover to provide good ventilation during the really warm months.
How many hours of sun would be good?
I don't know. I guess I would say similar to a vegetable garden, 6 to 8 at least.
Okay. What are your thoughts on relocated hives? Any issues or challenges?
Relocating or relocate.
Relocated hives.
Well, I'm not quite sure what that question's getting at, but I'll talk about moving hives. Um, So the bees have this amazing ability to orientate themselves when they're going out and foraging, um, to know where to come back to. And um, they also do this really cool thing, that they communicate to the other bees that, oh, I found this really great spot to, that we're going to forage, and there's a really good supply there. They do this dance. Um, they call it the waggle dance, where they move, around the frame, and you can, this is telling a story to the other bees. And they even have the ability to say, to kind of communicate that this is a really good forage. And they, because there's multiple forages going out and coming back, and they're only going to focus on, more or less one forage area at a time. And so one might be like, they're much more excited, and they'll say, this is a really great spot, we're going to do this waggle dance to show you that this is going to be the best foraging. And the other guy's like, well, mine's good, but you should do mine. And so they, and they decide to go with the most excited waggle dancer, essentially. But all that to say is, they have this kind of whole, they go out and they forage, and they're coming out all day, and then they come in, they come back to the hive at night. So all the bees are back in the hive at nighttime. Um, and so, and this also plays into inspecting a hive. Usually you want to inspect a hive in the middle of the day, because most of the population is out foraging, or a significant portion of the bees are out foraging. So you just less bees to deal with to do your inspection, and get in and get out to do the work that you need to do as the beekeeper. So they're all in the hive at night, and which makes it the ideal time to set up the hive if you need to move it. So um, if you so I'm just trying to address the question. It's fine to move hives. It's a little bit of a challenge, but it's not unreasonable. Essentially, what you're doing is, at nighttime, you're going out to the hive, you're closing up all the entrances with tape, or, you got to close up all the holes, use some kind of ratchet trap system to tie all the boxes together, and use some kind of dolly. And then you can move the hive to its new location. So typically speaking, the general recommendation is to, move the hive. If you're moving a hive, to move it, 1 or 2 miles away, because otherwise they may end up back in the original location. But I think, even if one way around that is just to put an old box, just one layer of supers in the old location, in case of any stragglers are coming back to the hive. If you want to just move it a little bit in your yard, like say you realize that you're not getting enough sun in your original location, every day when the bees go out to forage, they they go out to the entrance, and they're, okay, this is cool. This is just like I saw this yesterday, and they go out and they do their foraging, and they come back. But if they come to the entrance and they go to leave, and there's like sticks and twigs and grass that you have stuffed in the front, they're like, it causes them to reorientate themselves. So the trick there is to use that to your advantage if you need to move it just 10 feet away or something, and to put those, to move the hive at night again, and to put, some things in front of the entrance to cause themselves to reorientate. And then also have that box in the old location, that if any stragglers come back to it, then you can take that box and then put them back in the original hive. Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, cool. So we're moving on here. Having a good water source nearby is a good idea. Not that they will always use it, but especially during the dry months, just having an option for them. Water is very important. There are times of the year when there isn't much nectar, and they'll tend to congregate on a puddle with, it doesn't have to be clean water. just, I think the most important thing to note if you're setting some kind of water source up for them is to put, some rocks in it or some twigs or things that they can land on to dip their, to drink the water. Because there you will see situations where, you put out a bowl and there's a bunch of drowned bees in it because they didn't have something, they fell in essentially. Um, we talked about sunlight. It's a good idea to raise the hives off the ground, just uh, uh, just 6 inches at least. If you have multiple hives, you can have them facing all the same direction, but if you have the ability to have them face different directions, that can help prevent what's called drift, where when they're coming back, when they're going out and foraging, coming back, sometimes they will come back to the wrong hive and go inside. So you may notice if you have 3 hives, like in this situation, that there's drift and there's a much larger population on one of the ends than on the other. And that, you can rectify that to some level by moving bees or moving frames or shaking some bees into other hives. You can, generally speaking, most hives are painted, just to think about color for a second. Most hive equipment's painted white. That is not, the benefit of that is the white reflects sunlight the best. So it helps keep the hive coolest. So you can do other colors. I think just avoid really dark colors that absorb heat and make it, exacerbate problems with heat during the summer months. And I think at this point, this is kind of getting into the installation and stuff. I want to have a few minutes left to just open it up for, if people want to ask questions in person or, this is, hold on. This is the majority of what I really wanted to cover today. I did want to show the bee space though. One last thing I want to show is bee space. So the Langstroth hive system that we were talking about is set up to have this 3/8 inch space between the frames. And that's just something to know that like the bees like to work with that much space between, in and around where they're working at in the hive. They will always create comb to fit into bee space. So if, for some situations where like you forget to put in that last frame, or you put in a super, but not all the frames are in there, they're going to fill in that space. They do not want open space. They want their hive as a cohesive unit, the comb as in the hive, to always have this bee space of 3/8 inch between the comb and in and around it. Okay, so I think we'll take a pause or there and kind of, I'm going to just go to my last slide. This is my email address. If you have questions, if you're not in the remainder of the classes, and I want to give the opportunity for folks to come off of mute and just open it up to any other questions. And no, okay.
Oh, what are options for next classes via Zoom?
So that is only for the folks who are who've already filled out the application and been accepted into the program. This introduction class is open to anybody, but you should know who you are if you are in the class for the remaining classes.
Okay, and I think Merle, you had a question. I saw you come off mute. No, maybe
No, I was
not.
just saying hi and that I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
right on.
Can I just, one clarification?
Uh-huh.
Just on the moving, there's potential for the relocation, but from farther away, not just
Uh-huh.
like 10 feet, but like a hive that's in the neighborhood already that
Uh-huh.
potentially would be moved. Could you just speak on that for a sec? As far
Yeah.
as the problems, or maybe that's not a good idea.
So you're saying there's a hive that's a block away that you might move into your garden?
It's about like 3 or 4 blocks, so it's in the
Yeah.
yeah, it's in the neighborhood, but not, yeah, it would
Yes.
be, I think,
It's,
like maybe 5 blocks.
yeah, that's totally doable. It's just something that you would do. You know, you would do at night and kind of um essentially because the bees all come together at night, they're gonna they'll be all inside
They're
and
gonna
you're
be
closing
home.
all, what's that? They're,
They'll be
yeah,
home.
right. They come home for the night, and then you're just you know, sewing everything up and moving them to their new location. I mean, that's the very short, dirty way of it. But there's a few preparations and stuff, but it's, you know, doable. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other,
Hey,
yeah.
Keto, there was a couple. How do you know where to put your hive in your garden, in your backyard, in the neighborhood?
So just kind of going back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier was you just want to be out of a hive, full sun, out of just kind of out of general pedestrian traffic. Um, Ideally, you know, someplace that's easy for you to access. You know, having some kind of fencing or windbreak at the back or the side of it is helpful, but not necessary. Um, and you know, other than that, there's a lot of flexibility. Full sun is really helpful, though.
During winter, can you put the hive in maybe a tent setting to break wind?
There are ways that people give some kind of protection. Tent, uh, I would think that a tent might be somewhat problematic just because, you know, there's no leaves on the trees and tents are going to get really blown around during the winter months. But um, you, like, some people will set bring them inside of like a protective structure that has the entrance to the hive able to access the outdoors. So essentially you're getting the protection of the structure, but the bees can still go directly outside. You know, there's styles of bee houses. The video that I shared, the Tales from the Hive, shows an example of a European system that kind of does that.
Okay, this person lives across from a fire station. Will the noise bother the bees?
Like the engines? No, I don't. I mean, it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. That was it. So far, if there aren't any ones. No.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, if you are a participant in the series, you have some homework to do. There's some reading and watching the Tales from a Hive video. I encourage everybody to watch the Tales from the Hive video, regardless. It's so good. And I will see you guys on Thursday. And if you're not in the class, I'll see you soon enough. Thanks for being with me here today, Danielle. And thanks for everybody for coming out. And we'll see you the next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.